Obvious example, by the way, of the stupidity of the left on this issue comes courtesy of Michelle Wolf, who is just an awful human being. So Michelle Wolf, you'll recall, from being terrible at comedy and also being on the White House Correspondents' Dinner where she yelled about her vagina or some such. She decided that in honor of the 4th of July, the most American thing she could think of was killing your baby in the womb and cutting its brain out. So here she is doing her 4th of July special in which she does a full-on star-spangled tribute to killing your baby in the womb.
Women, don't forget, you have the power to give life and men will try to control that. Don't let them! God bless abortions and God bless America!
God bless abortions and God bless America. It says the Break's 10th annual salute to abortion. Wow. God bless America and God bless abortion. The perverse level of love for abortion, abortion as a sacrament, abortion as a sign of bravery, abortion as a sign of decency on the left. This is why they are so concerned that Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned. Not because Roe v. Wade being overturned will actually amount to the illegalization of abortion, but simply because they're afraid that people might actually want to vote on the issue of whether you ought to kill your baby in the womb. And they can't win this argument because this argument is unwinnable. People should not be allowed to kill babies in the womb. Even most Democrats believe that there should be significant restrictions on the ability to kill a baby in the womb. Right? They may not agree on how early you ban that, but most of them agree that 20 weeks and on, that should be banned. Okay, so Michelle Wolf is like, this radicalism is really insane. It shows why they're so concerned with the nomination of this justice, because they believe the Supreme Court is all that stands between them and getting rid of something that they hold holy, namely the ability to kill your child in the womb. Okay, so I want to talk about the conservative sort of response to some of the Supreme Court stuff, particularly Roe v. Wade, in just a second. First, with the left so militant about abortion that they are talking about abortion as a sacrament. I'm old enough to remember when Bill Clinton said abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. I'm old enough to remember that. Now, it's abortion should be plentiful, available, and celebrated. We should cheer for it because killing a baby in the womb is a sign of womanhood. It's a sign that you are truly a woman in charge of your own life. If you have not actually killed a baby in your womb, that means that you are subjecting yourself to the hierarchical preferences of evil masculinity. But if you kill a baby in the womb, that shows that you've stood up to the man. Sure, you might have killed a baby in the process, but at least you stood up to the man. And this is the perspective of someone on the left. Now, the pro-life issue is one on which the right can win and should win because this is an issue that is as vital morally as any issue the United States has ever faced up to and including slavery. Okay, the murder of 1 million babies a year in the womb is a serious moral issue. And if you don't think it's a serious moral issue, it's because you haven't looked at it hard enough. Okay, but folks on the right tend to shy away from this, and it's a serious problem. So Leonard Leo, who's one of the fellows who's helping Trump select the next Supreme Court justice, he was on Sunday he was on This Week on ABC, and he said that rumors of Roe being overturned, that's greatly exaggerated. Why is it always the job of the right to quell rumors about Roe being overturned? I don't understand this. Why shouldn't the right say, hell yes, we want to overturn Roe because it's a bad decision? Why shouldn't that be something the right campaigns on? By the way, overturning Roe does not mean that abortion becomes illegal across 50 states. If you think that California is suddenly going to ban abortion, you're out of your mind. California is not going to ban abortion. Neither is Massachusetts, neither is New York, neither is New Jersey, neither is Illinois. Right? There are too many states in the union that are going to allow abortion to continue unfettered. But the right is constantly running away from their own positions on this stuff. So Leonard Leo, whom I think is a quite brilliant legal mind, here he's saying, well, Roe's not going to be overturned. Let's stop with all the fright. Why is everyone so worried?
First of all, nobody really knows. We've been talking about this for 36 years, going all the way back to the nomination of Sandra O'Connor. And after that 36-year period, we only have a single individual on the court who has expressly said he would overturn Roe. So I think it's a bit of a scare tactic and rank speculation more than anything else.
Okay, so, all of the talk about don't worry about it, it's just speculation. The right is constantly attempting to run away from this issue. So more evidence of this. Tomi Lahren, who I've refrained from criticizing generally because, Tomi does what Tomi does. But Tomi Lahren has now made the case that we should never speak about abortion. This is, of course, because she is pro-choice. Tomi Lahren is pro-abortion. She went on The View and she suggested that it's only religious objection to abortion that was driving the right's objection to abortion. So she was on Fox News Final Thoughts and she suggested that Republicans only win by staying out of the social issues.
To be honest, the federal government does few things well, and I believe regulating social issues is an area where it fails. Let the churches, the nonprofits, and the community groups step in, not almighty Uncle Sam.
Okay, so I am generally friendly to libertarian arguments, but this is not any social issue when you're talking about abortion. When you're talking about abortion, you're talking about an issue of protecting human life. Okay, by this definition, slavery is a social issue. By the way, Tomi Lahren is very fond of talking about social issues when it suits her purposes. I mean, how many times have you heard Tomi Lahren talk about the flag and patriotism and kneeling for the national anthem and culture? I mean, that's what Tomi Lahren specializes in. She's not exactly a Milton Friedman economist, right? You're not going to hear her sitting there spouting Vienna School of Economics explanations of trade theory, right? That's not Tomi's thing. So for her to say that we are not going to focus in on social issues because otherwise we're never going to win, I think is foolish. Not only is it foolish, let's be real about this. If the right is not fighting to protect human life, then the right is not doing its job. No victory that leaves behind babies in the womb to be carved apart and then flushed down a toilet, no right that does that in the name of victory is winning a victory that is worth fighting for. Victory has to mean something. And one of those things that victory has to mean is standing up for the lives of the unborn. Now, Tomi responded to all of this. She got heavy flack from a lot of folks on the right for saying all of this, that the right should leave behind the social issues. By the way, Donald Trump didn't leave behind the social issues during the election cycle. He was very pro-life during the election cycle, at least insofar as what he had to say. And Tomi then tweeted something out about how she's not going to be cudgeled into believing something that she doesn't believe. No one's trying to cudgel Tomi into believing something she doesn't believe. She's certainly able to believe whatever she wants to believe. The point I'm making is that she's wrong. So she tweeted out, do I form my political beliefs based on acceptance from the self-appointed thought wardens of either political party? No. And I never will. You don't have to like or agree with my thoughts, but at least you know they are my own. A couple of things about this. This seems to be the last refuge of people who can't make a good argument nowadays, is that you make an argument and then they say, you're not going to box me in with your standards. I'm not trying to box you in. Make your argument. I just think your argument sucks. Like, that's not me boxing you in. I've heard the same from several relatively major figures in the past several weeks, that if I say that I don't like something that you've said, that suddenly I'm trying to provoke you into moving your position. No, I'm trying to present a differing position. You can say whatever you want. It's a free country. You can make a bad argument if you want to. Also, the substitution of authenticity for solid thinking is not even an argument. It's an emotional appeal. This idea that you don't have to like or agree with my thoughts, but at least you know they are my own. Right, I assume they are your own, which is why I am criticizing you. Or if they're somebody else's, I'd be criticizing them. The substitution of authenticity, well, he's very authentic in how he feels. Therefore, you really shouldn't question. What they have to say. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. I think that's completely nonsensical on virtually every level. Okay, meanwhile, I don't want to center on my criticism for folks on the right, because the reality is that folks on the left continue to be more and more extreme in every possible way. Over the weekend, there was more sort of extreme behavior from folks on the left. The point is, I don't think that we ought to surrender our principles simply because the left is really militant on issues like abortion. I think that ought to make us more militant, at least in our pursuit of the right principles. I don't mean more militant like physically, but I do mean that we ought to stand up strongly and proudly for the positions in which we believe, particularly when they happen to be purely moral, as in protection of human life.
Statistics about how there's a disproportionate amount of single motherhood in African American communities, right?
Right.
And so starting in 1960 or 1970 with Roe v. Wade, we had this boom of legalization of abortion, which I kind of appreciate your understanding the pro-life argument. I was very pro-choice until I heard that, and it kind of made me in that middle ground of like, oh, I don't really know what to do. So I did some research. And so finding that when abortion was legalized, you look at Romania and then you look at America, right? This is the Freakonomics argument. You saw that there was a decrease in crime between people under 25 in the 1990s. And so this kind of made me think that maybe this is a correlation between that of the white and African American communities, because at that time, African American youths were predominantly low income. So they didn't have access to that form of contraception, which I think is why we feel that today, while there is this huge proportion of, what you're saying, 70% of single motherhoods are African American. If not, that's the reason. I was just curious, what is the reason, and then what is the solution to that?
Okay, so abortion is not the reason for the drop in crime. First of all, even if it were the reason for the drop in crime, it's not an excuse for killing babies. So, so that's number one. The evidence that it's not the reason for the drop in crime, Barry Latzer makes this argument in a book it's a very good book called The Rise and Fall of Violent Crime in America. And he talks about the fact that there was a huge violent crime spike in the United States in the mid-1980s. And it only ended in about 1994. From 1994 to 2010, there was an enormous violent crime decrease. Okay, the problem is that abortion, the top coterie of people who commit crimes are people between the ages of 14 and 20. That is the key age where people commit crimes. And what you see is that abortion was legalized in 1973. What you would assume then is that the crime rates would begin to drop in the late 80s. Right? They would begin to drop in like 1987. Right? That's when people who had been born but weren't would have turned 14 or 15 years old. right? But that's not what happened. The crime rates only began to drop in 1994, 1995, coincident with something Hillary Clinton ran away from, her husband's crackdown on crime. And once you put more cops on the streets and put people in jail for crime, it turns out they're not on the streets to commit crime. So the correlation doesn't actually fit. So the idea that that's the case, it also doesn't make sense, because the fact is that the number of abortions has decreased markedly over the last 10 or 15 years, and you haven't seen a consummate spike in crime. So abortion rates started to decrease by the mid-90s. And so you would figure that there had been a big spike in crime around 2008, 2009, no big spike in crime. So the correlation doesn't even fit. If you're going to, correlation doesn't equal causation, but in order for there to be causation, there has to at least be some proof of correlation. There's not even proof of correlation.
That was my question. My question was more or less, what is the reason why there's such a disproportionate amount of single mothers in the African-American poverty, like in that realm of?
Because, okay, so the real reason that there's a lot of single motherhood in the black community is because single motherhood has increased tremendously across all communities. So it used to be that in 1960, 5% of white women were single mothers. Today it's 40% of white women. So all across, it's increased. Single motherhood in the black community has been a bigger problem than in the white community because, yes, of pathologies of slavery. That goes all the way back to, back in slave times, the rate of single motherhood was really high because of forcible separation of families, and that carried over into Jim Crow as well, although it was beginning to decline, actually, in the 1950s, in the 1940s and the 1950s. With the explosion of welfare, which was directly targeted at low-income communities, which happened to be disproportionately minority, now there was an actual economic incentive to continue in pathologies of single motherhood. That if you were thinking about getting married before you had the baby, now maybe you didn't think quite as hard about it because, after all, the government was there to pick you up. And so the single motherhood rate continues to rise at a very high rate, but it's rising similarly at a high rate in the white community, too. So I don't want to pretend it's solely a black problem, single motherhood. It isn't. There's a very high single motherhood rate in the black community, high rate in the white community, high rate in the Hispanic community. That's mainly because of the sexual revolution and the ideas from the left that a child doesn't need a mother and a father, and that there's some sort of inherent virtue that attends to being a single mother, which is really an irritating thing. There's a lot more virtue that attends to being a responsible mother, marrying dad, and then there being two parents there to help raise the kid. It's a source of never-ending annoyance to me that the way the popular culture treats disparate situations is that my wife, who's responsible enough to get married, wait a few years, have a job, have kids, that in the heroism pantheon, she is secondary to the girl who decided to get pregnant out of wedlock at 19 and live in poverty. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. Good decisions should be rewarded by society.
What's the solution, though?
The solution is
Poor-income households who are disproportionately African-American.
Okay, so the ones who've already had kids or the ones who have not had kids yet?
Today and just in the community.
I know, I'm asking you, are you talking about the ones who have kids already or the ones who don't have kids already? Okay, so the ones who have kids already, the solution is that we have to have a social network that is built up for them, and that can't be provided by government. Okay, that needs to be provided by a growing charitable association base. It needs to be attended to by a religious community. A huge percentage of the black community still goes to churches. Those churches should take a heavy role in encouraging marriage, and they should take a heavy role in helping people pick up after themselves once life mistakes have been made. And I think that many of those churches are working on that. But those mistakes cannot be unmade by society just by handing people checks, because all that does is prolong the pathology. So what you really do have to do is help, as you have to have family members that help you out. You have to have a social network that helps you out, and that's going to be rebuilt over a course of time. There's no immediate solution. I'm not going to pretend that I have an immediate turnkey solution for a single mom who made a lot of mistakes, is living in poverty, and now I'm going to turn her into a millionaire overnight. I can't do that. The government can't do that. No one can do that. The government can't take my money and give it to her and make her wealthy. The government can't take your money and give it to her and make her responsible. Okay, the fact is that individual decisions matter even after you've made a bad one.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.